Tonight, there's a new Johnny Carson book out called Love Johnny Carson. We have the author in an exclusive, Mark Malkoff. Tonight. Next.
Blonde hair, blue eyes, nice skin, so gorgeous. We thank the life gorgeous. Thank the life gorgeous. I love the life gorgeous. Its torso is so tight.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Life Gorgeous. This is where I share my magical life in hopes of improving your life. Very special episode. Sit back and enjoy. As many of you know, my favorite late night host of all time is Johnny Carson, smooth and sophisticated. And there's a young gentleman here who knows more about him than I do, I think. Mark Malkoff. I'll take that little part out. I was going to ask you before we started recording. So, love the book. It's called Love Johnny Carson, and you're an obsessed fan. First question, how long did it take you to write it? Because it's thorough.
I did a podcast for 8 years about Carson, so I talked to almost 400 people for that, and then the book took me another 4 years, and I interviewed additional people. So, the whole thing was about 12 years, and it was the deepest dive, definitely, in terms of a definitive book on Carson's Tonight Show from 62 to 92.
It was a deep dive, and we won't get to all of it. If we did, it would be a 5-hour podcast.
Yes.
The obvious question I have is, you were born in 87.
I was actually born in 1976. The internet sometimes is wrong.
Oh, I looked it up. Thank God.
I was 16. I love the fact that that you think I look that young. That's a huge compliment. I was 16.
You have a baby face. You have a baby.
Thank you. So do you. Johnny went off the air when I was 16 years old, and it was one of those things. My dad got me into comedy really young. I knew who, people in kindergarten were talking about Mighty Mouse, and I was talking about Buddy Hackett and Jerry Lewis and staying up late to watch Carson, and there was something so likable about that guy. I mean, Craig, he was with kids, he was with the movie stars, he was with animals, and endlessly charming. Senior citizens, people that were 100 years old. Then he'd be with the comedians, and it was this party, but it was about him. There was just something about him, and I had a lot of questions about what went on behind the scenes.
Yeah. So it's similar. When I was a kid, my dad was very funny. And I tell people he was a Steve Allen type. He was from the East Coast. He did a little bit of acting in theater in high school and in college and even out of college, played piano by ear, but he worked for Procter and Gamble, and he got married and had to get a job. And he loved Johnny. He loved Johnny, and I love Johnny. And, but I watched a lot of different comedy. I watched Monty Python and Fernwood Tonight with Martin Mull.
Me too.
But Johnny I just want to go to his style for a second, because in the book, there's an article about Johnny in 1962 when he took over the Tonight Show. And since Carson took over in 62, the show has become brighter, smoother, and more sophisticated. I use the word urbane sometimes. This guy, he's different. Now, my second favorite host is David Letterman. And Dave had an edge. And when you're in your 20s, when Dave came on the air, it was pretty special. But in the long run, because I like Frasier's my favorite sitcom, and I like James Bond growing up, and I like White Collar, so Johnny was special. How would you describe his style?
Yeah, I mean, definitely sophisticated. Definitely, he, for whatever reason, was portrayed as this. Well, he was a Midwestern person that just loved to laugh, loved comedy. He was uniquely special that he made his guests look good. He would allow his guests to get the laugh. And he just was all about excellence. He put all his energy and time into the show. His personal life definitely suffered. But in terms of a talent and in terms of just discovering talent and the people that he was putting on the show, it was unbelievable. And for a show to last 30 years on a late night show, these shows were only supposed to be a few years. Steve Allen and Jack Paar only did like 4 or 5 years. So it was unheard of for somebody to make this into a career. And he just exceeded anybody's expectations.
So I don't really care about gossipy stuff about people in general. sometimes my take on Johnny is he's more than nice enough, and he can be anyone can be temperamental. What they don't understand is when you do a late night show, you got to turn it off. You can't be on all the time.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing the show at the office, and if I want to go to stretch my legs and go to the break room, if I see a writer, I'm talking to them because those are my favorite people. But if it's a coworker, I don't have time for small talk, but I'll always say hi. But if they ask how my weekend is, I can't go into detail. I just want to stretch my legs. So Johnny, my dad used to say, tell me what you think of this. Because Johnny was married, how many, 3 times? Something like that? 4 times.
Yeah.
He'd say, it's not exciting being married to Johnny. He just did a show. He wants to go home and chill out. He just wants to decompress. And I don't know if that's true, though. It's not fun being, okay. Because I love the Rich Little quote about at the end of the book.
You just want to go back to Malibu and watch the waves?
He wants to go on the air, be funny, be witty, which he is, and then go to Malibu and watch the waves. But at the beginning of the book, you have these different quotes as people trying to capture or label Johnny. And it made me laugh because we all know that everyone's different. And I like to use the term when amateurs diagnose. Why did you do that at the top? I thought it was great that you had the different quotes of people saying Johnny was this, Johnny was that.
I just thought it was interesting because it really depends on, first of all, the circumstances of when they saw Johnny and if they were friends with him. I mean, the media made this man out to be cold and aloof with no friends. And that's what I thought going into this podcast. Then I start talking to David Steinberg and Chevy Chase, who played poker with him for years, and all these people. And they said, Mark, he is the same guy almost on the Tonight Show, off. It's almost the same person, maybe a little less gregarious. But they told me he was witty, he was funny. And if he was your friend, he would do anything for you. He expected loyalty. He gave loyalty. If that loyalty was crossed, it was a shut door. But to get that whole the different just outlook that he was pretty much the same guy was revolutionary. Yes, he would save his energy. Some of his coworkers would see him before the show and he'd save it. He was doing an hour 45 minutes when he started the Tonight Show, then 90 minutes.
Right.
He was exhausted. NBC on the weekends had him do affiliate meetings, dinners. The guy, for just self-preservation reasons and his energy, would definitely save it for the show. He'd only arrive a couple hours before the show. He'd be working on it all day at home, but no lunches, not around people. As an introvert, being around people would zap his energy, so he'd save it for showtime.
Makes complete sense.
Yeah.
On a side note, did you ever see the series on Paramount called The Offer, The Making of the Godfather, or not?
I didn't. I know about it, though.
Okay. Because this guy nails Robert Evans. This guy named Matthew Good. And I knew Robert Evans and hung out with him. And people says, is that like Robert Evans? I go, well, yeah, but not every line he says is that magic, So it would be kind of silly if Johnny was as funny at the poker game as he was and in the hallways as he was on the air. You got to save it. It makes complete sense. So I just thought it was a little ridiculous that these people were trying to label him. And that's why when I read biographies, if anything's negative, I question the source. Because people have to understand you can't perform. You have to decompress. Does that make sense?
100%. I mean, he'd go home and play the drums. He would occasionally, after the show, go out to dinner, but it was rare. It wasn't with a movie star. It would only be with Carl Sagan, because he was interested in astronomy. It would be with Jim Fowler, the zoologist, because Carson was endlessly curious. But for the most part, he just had to save his energy. That's why the guest hosts were so important. It wasn't because Carson was lazy, and it wasn't because Carson was only doing 3 shows near the end. He was in his 60s, and he did not have the energy to be doing it 5 nights a week. That's why he didn't want the work to suffer. So that's why they had the guest hosts.
I wonder what their schedule was, because I remember our schedule. So there are 52 weeks in a year.
Yeah.
We did 42. So every 4 or 5 weeks, we take a week off to rejuvenate. That's what the shows did. You'd have repeats. So 42 weeks out of 52 to recharge the batteries. So it starts off, the show is in New York for a number of years, about 10, I believe.
Yeah.
And I did not know his wife, the beautiful Joanne Carson, was so influential behind the scenes.
Wife number two, the show never would have happened. She was running the show. One of Johnny's producers told me that Johnny had no idea how powerful she was, hiring people, getting rid of people. I mean, she's the one, did not tell Johnny. She contacted two people from NBC, Dave Tebbett and Mort Warner, had them come secretly to a Friars Club roast of Gary Moore where Johnny was performing and got them. They were so impressed, and she's like, offer him the Tonight Show. Johnny turned it down. Everybody told Johnny, nobody can follow Jack Parton. She's the one that convinced him, you can do this. We're going to do this together. She's the one in 1964 that told him to do Vegas. He was going to turn down all those millions. She's like, I don't think I can do a nightclub act. She's like, we'll do this together. Whenever he stood up to NBC, he was Nebraska. He was non-confrontative. He wouldn't confront. And she was like, no, you're going to stand up. So all of that was Joanne, wife number two.
How long were they married?
They married in 1963, and then I believe 1970 or 71 was the divorce. And she's the one that brought in Fred de Cordova, who famously lasted the longest out of all the producers. It was all her influence.
You didn't have too much in there about Freddie de Cordova, did you, or not? In the book?
A little. I mean, Fred de Cordova didn't really do that much. He was this charming guy that was essentially a salesman. His dad was a con man. He talked about this, and was just, he knew his talent was that he knew how to talk to Johnny and make him happy. Johnny was in awe of him because he directed Jack Benny. They had met in the 50s when Johnny did Jack Benny's show. And he was just a guy that was just, he was really funny, really witty. Even the people on staff that said he was a mean person, they didn't like him, would say he was funny. I mean, you can't argue with that. But all he wanted to do on a show day was read his paperback mystery novels, smoke. They'd give him a carton of cigarettes and a bottle of vodka. He'd drink during the show. And that was Fred de Cordova. And his wife Janet really liked pot, and their home in Beverly Hills reeked of pot. And then famously, also Fred de Cordova went broke. I mean, it's really, really sad. But Johnny was in awe of him in the beginning, and then their relationship in '91 when Johnny's son passed away suffered some damage. We can talk about that if you want later. But that was rough.
It's interesting because I have these notes in order. And I do have the end, which the line in the book that I could not believe was from Freddie de Cordova, but we'll get to that in a second.
I know which one you're going to say.
Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, that told me that they didn't necessarily like each other or something, or they were bitter. There was some bitterness there. So I'm a little fascinated because I don't get enough pictures of Freddie de Cordova. My thing is full head of brown hair, good looking guy, charismatic. Am I right about that? He's charismatic.
100%. Yeah, I think near the end he was dyeing his hair because I know that he was doing some spray thing in the office. But no, he was handsome. He was suave. Like one of the talent coordinators said, you could sell ice to an Eskimo. I mean, any guest that was upset, Freddie could go there and just charm them. And somebody that was throwing a tantrum, they'd be eating out of his palm.
Right. So he's a little bit like Robert Evans, the producer.
Yes.
Robert was slick. He was very slick. He talked. I don't know if Freddie was a ladies' man. Robert Evans was a ladies' man. But right. So I'm a little fascinated with Freddie Cordova because there's not much about him. Not in general, not just your book. He seemed like a larger than life character. You know what I'm saying?
Fred just liked hanging out with Jack Benny, the Reagans, going to Chasen's, hanging out with the Hollywood people. That was his life, the Wassermans. He was all about show business. That was his entire life.
So we might as well do the line now so I don't forget. So, So you tell people that I think it was with 9 months left in the show.
Yeah.
They had Freddie de Cordova and Johnny Carson had a falling out. Go ahead and tell people what happened.
So Johnny in 1991 had a son that tragically passed away in an accident. He was a photographer. The car fell off a ravine. And Johnny took a month off, was wounded, and it was bad. And then the first show back after a month was the hardest show Johnny ever did. He said this. People were worried that he wouldn't be able to go out and perform. And at the end of the show, he did a eulogy for his son and was showing photographs of his son. And Fred de Cordova, I've heard it two ways. One was giving Johnny the wrap it up sign. Another was that he was on the phone distracting Johnny. But whatever it was, Johnny wasn't a yeller. He was not somebody that would just explode. but it was one of the rare times that he was livid, and he held it together until they were in their office with closed doors. He didn't do it in front of the staff, and he just lit into Fred, said, "You will never be on the studio floor ever again." And Fred, to his credit, took responsibility for it, and their relationship really was never the same. Fred was still the figurehead. He would still say hi to the guests beforehand, but he wasn't allowed in the studio. Only when Jay Leno was permanent guest host, he could do those days. But the line you're referring to is near the end of the show. One of the writers asked Fred, "What is it like working all these decades with a genius?" And he said, what did he say? Fred Allen was a genius, or Jack Benny was a genius. This is a disc jockey that got lucky.
Bam.
Yeah, I know.
Because
right?
as I'm reading the book, I'm saying, now wait a second. If these guys are close, I thought of some of my friends, if they had screwed up, one of my producer writer friends, because they're still my friends.
We get Mike Gibbons,
what's that?
Yeah. Like Mike Gibbons or somebody like that.
Gibby.
Yeah.
He's my guy.
Yeah.
Love him.
Sure.
And if he made a mistake and was rapping me, that's a major mistake by Freddie de Cordova. Major mistake. Just like Joan Rivers we'll get to. Major mistake. Yeah. Totally. But I would forgive him. And so I was saying to Johnny, and the way you wrote it was he didn't let Freddie de Cordova on the floor for the last show.
That's right.
And then they're talking to me, he goes, "He's no Jack Benny." I'm delivering it differently. He's a disc jockey that got lucky. Now that's, Letterman's a weatherman who got lucky. Come on. You have to start somewhere. And so I could tell that he was, there was some bitterness there, right?
Just a little bit, yes. I mean, I thought it was very nice that Johnny even let him stay. I mean, Johnny he knew that there was a year and a half left. It would have been a huge story in the press, and he probably just didn't want the hassle. And it was easier giving Fred his dignity and still as the figurehead. It's unbelievable it didn't get leaked to the media. I mean, today I don't think that would have happened, but Fred still had his honor intact and, stayed on and was Jay Leno's consultant for a bunch of years.
You have a lot of information in your head there. And I did want to ask, you call yourself an obsessive Carson fan. Okay. Why is that? Was that you calling yourself that, or was that a review of your book?
I guess it's me. I mean, I just would say more comedy in general. I know a lot about Saturday Night Live, a lot about Python, but a lot about Letterman. But Carson was the most mysterious one out of all of them because I feel like most of those other shows have stories about what went on behind the scenes or how they made the shows. And with Carson, it was this giant mystery, what went on behind the scenes. I would hear little snippets here and there, but it wasn't until Johnny's final show that he let cameras behind to show how the show was put together. It was a 7-minute retrospect that only left me with more questions. And then in 2012, Peter Jones did his brilliant American Masters documentary on Carson, 2 hours. And I had even more questions. And Peter Jones was the one that gave me the confidence. "Mark, you got to do this podcast about Carson." I told him the idea. He's like, "Tell everyone I endorse you." And I said, I called Peter the next day. I said, "Peter, who should I have on?" He's like, "Do you want Carl Reiner's home phone number?" I said, "Yeah." "Do you want Angie Dickinson's email address?" I'm like, "Uh-huh." "Do you want Doc Severinson's cell phone number?" And the seas just parted. I had no idea that this would happen. And pretty much everybody wanted to talk to me about Carson. I had they would say, "I love Johnny Carson," hence the title, Love Johnny Carson. And it was a shock to me. I thought it was going to go negative. I really, really did from some of the previous books.
Right. So more stuff that jumped out at me in the book. They're still in New York right now doing the Tonight Show. Right. Some anecdotes you had. I didn't know. I guess I forgot about Judy Garland having a rough ending. I knew she died early. I had Liza Minnelli on.
Wow.
And my mom, she never did this. She called and she said, "You say hi to her and tell her I love her mom." Because Judy Garland, Dorothy meant so much to so many people. So tell us about Johnny and Judy Garland.
Judy Garland was near the end of her life. She was thoroughly addicted to pills and to alcohol. She was in debt. The IRS was putting liens on her house, and it was really bad. One of the talent coordinators, when she was on the show, I think this was 67 or 68, they were walking down the street in New York, and she wanted to buy one of her albums in a record store, but didn't have the money. So he actually bought the record for Judy Garland, and then Johnny found out about it and bought her a record player. But it was just really sad. They all said that she looked on her deathbed. She looked really thin, really frail, and she was just in her late 40s at this point. And I was wondering if they could get through the show. At one point, she went on Dick Cavett like a week before she went on Carson, and this was Christmas time. And the IRS showed up to seize her $500 payment because she demanded $500 payment from Cavett to do the show. And they actually snuck her out a back entrance so she could keep the $500 and not give it to the IRS. So she goes on Carson's show. She sings 2 songs, and they put her up secretly in the Plaza Hotel. I say secretly. She kept it from her then boyfriend, and who was staying in another hotel. And I don't know the exact circumstances of what happened, but Carson and her did get on a Sunday, Saturday night, early into Sunday. Carson's driver told me that he drove them around and took them to the Plaza Hotel where Judy was staying, and Johnny went in with her and came back out an hour through a side entrance. I cannot imagine Carson, who really could have had almost so many women, in terms of good-looking women, would be interested in Judy Garland at that point. Right. I don't know if he was taking care. She was calling his office every day. I mean, she was obsessed. Rex Reed told me, the film critic said that she drove away all her friends because she just would call them at all hours of the night, and you just could not get away from her. Liza at this point was not talking to her, I believe. Right. That's what Rex Reed told me. So Johnny was just inundated with calls, had his personal assistant when I go to the Plaza just to babysit her, to watch her because she needed somebody. Right. So I don't know the exact circumstances, but Judy Garland went on the Tonight Show, got through it. Johnny helped her across the stage, and then 6 months later, she died. I mean, it's so sad.
Yeah. That was some stuff I didn't know. The other thing is, Henry Bushkin. Again, I had an order, but now it's just flowing because I was
whatever you want to do.
Yeah. I didn't know sorry, I didn't know they had a falling out, and I didn't know. So Henry Bushkin was his friend and lawyer.
Yes.
Correct?
That's right.
And after working together for a number of years, Johnny found out that there was some corrupt behavior. Alleged corrupt behavior. Stealing money. That Henry Bushkin was stealing money from Johnny, correct?
These are what some of people that knew Carson alleged. They told me. Author Bill Zemme, who wrote a Carson book, that spent time with Johnny. That was alleged. Bushkin and Johnny were tight from, I believe they met in 1970 or 71 up until like around 87. And Johnny, when he found out what allegedly happened, was crying. I mean, there were tears because it was his best friend. He felt betrayed. When he felt betrayed, the relationship was over. And his third wife, Joanna, who he divorced in 83, was telling him relentlessly that you need to get rid of Bushkin, that he is not a good influence on you. And Johnny, when he found out what actually supposedly happened, said Joanna was right and called her and said, you were right. And it really did devastate them. But they were very close. I mean, Bushkin in his book tried to make it out that they weren't friends, but Bushkin's then wife said that they were as close as anybody can be. And Bushkin in podcast since has said that they were friends. Johnny did have other friends, but he spent the most time with definitely with Bushkin. But near the end, it was just really, really bad.
Yeah. So I thought it was. Again, I'm not an obsessive fan. I didn't know. I didn't read any Carson biographies. Yeah. I read a Jackie Gleason biography.
Oh yeah, those are great. I've read one too.
In like when I was out of college, I was living in Venice, California. Here's the quote I remember. Jackie Gleason says, "I can go to a party this Saturday night, and 20 people are funnier than me, but I'm the only one doing it on stage."
Wow.
Which is kind of like don't waste it. At a party, unless you're writing jokes, and you're trying them out. But anyway, so I didn't know Bushkin wrote a book. I thought that was, it sounds pretty bad.
He did. I just want to emphasize that he waited till Carson died because he couldn't do it while Carson was alive. And then he was a practicing lawyer. He had to be disbarred himself, so he couldn't practice law anymore to write the book. He wrote in his book that Johnny died alone and didn't have friends. Johnny did not die alone. He said this, repeated this in interviews. Johnny passed away. His wife was there. His 2 sons were there. Other family. Bushkin really tried to make this out like Carson died. It was no friends. And I've talked to the friends. It just, with the portrayal that Bushkin gave, I do not think was very accurate in terms of
Right.
certain pivotal moments in Carson's life.
Don't you think it's ridiculous that he wrote the book and betrayed his friend or not?
I never wanted to talk to him. People ask me sometimes, why didn't you ask him to be on the podcast? And I said personally, I just didn't feel comfortable. I didn't want to talk to somebody about I didn't feel good about talking to somebody about their former client that they represented.
Right.
I didn't feel good about it. Somebody gave me the book. I didn't buy it. They're like, do you want to read it? If you give it to me, sure. There's definitely stuff I'm sure that's true. There were some things I read that I knew weren't true. I'm not even close to being true.
Right.
One of them was the Frank Sinatra the Saving Johnny's Life section with the mafia, which I do go into detail a bit about what Bushkin got wrong on certain of those things with Joe Colombo and the mob.
Right.
But I thought it was important to really, for the first time, some of these stories that people didn't know about, and we don't have to go into it now, but something like Joan Rivers, Bushkin, just to clear up from at least Johnny's perspective and the people that knew him what actually happened, because Carson didn't want to get into a he said, she said, he said, let Rivers say whatever she wants. I'm just going to be classy about it. Somebody asked him, what do you think about Joan Rivers? And he said, I wish her the best. That was Johnny. I mean, she, in his mind, she just didn't exist anymore. It was a close relationship.
I'm gonna bring up Joan in a second, but I wanted to say, because you're a fan of Johnny, I'm glad you wrote it, because I thought you were fair. There,
I tried
warts and all.
Yeah.
Johnny has a temper. You wrote it. Johnny has a temper, and you gave. But he doesn't have to be perfect. What he was on the air, I kind of knew when you just said the guys who play poker with him. What we saw on the air is who he is, and people. I'm telling you, man, you can't talk to everybody. When you're famous and you're walking around, you try to be nice, but you can't go 20 minutes with a person on everybody on the sidewalk. You can't do it.
Johnny would go to a restaurant. People would sit down at his table uninvited. They would grab him by his arm. They went to bed with him at 11:30. They felt they know me. No self-preservation. Mark David Chapman, who killed John Lennon, short list of people to kill if it wasn't John Lennon. Johnny's on the list. FBI background, constantly protecting him from death threats. I mean, the guy just needed self-preservation.
So back to Bushkin for 1 second. I read, I didn't read the book, obviously. I just found out about it, and I saw a summary saying they talked about Carson's, his womanizing and some of his drinking. Sure. Are there things that I think I know the answer is yes, but I'm just going to ask you. Are things that that you didn't put in the book? You said, I'm not putting this in the book. I'm not putting in the book he had an affair with so-and-so. That's just too tawdry.
I don't see. There were people that I recorded with afterwards that would tell me things, and then I would ask them, "Do you know this for sure?" And they said, "Well, no. It was just I heard these things." Like some people said that, back in the day at NBC, the white powder was flowing all over the place. It was ubiquitous in the sound stages, and some people said that was going on with Johnny. And I asked them, "Did you ever see it?" And they said, "Well, no." So I'm like, I didn't put it in the book. I'm like, okay, this is just pure speculation. So there were definitely names of some people. There was one person I talked to that did tell me after we recorded that after we were done, she's like, can I tell you something? I'm like, sure. And she's like, I had a relationship with Johnny. I was like, while he was married. I was like, okay, if you want to tell me. But I mean, I do talk that he was unfaithful. I put that in. I do talk about the drinking because he would talk about it on the Tonight Show. He said, I have a problem when I drink too much. I turn into Attila the Hun. Sometimes people get fun loving. I want to fight everybody. And he talked on air about that lousy night at the Copacabana where he ruined Jerry Vale's set with a bunch of other comedians. He said, Johnny said that was a lousy thing to do. And Vale said Carson would apologize for decades every time he saw him. Right. So I did think it was important to show that this guy had flaws, but he would talk about on the Tonight Show about being, I'm overly competitive. It's not a good thing.
Yeah. You have a drinking story there with Rodney Dangerfield, and Rodney got a little upset with Johnny, huh?
Yeah, Dangerfield was similar to Johnny, that if they felt that somebody wasn't fair to them or disrespected them or something, that the relationship was pretty much over. And, Johnny, when he would go out to comedy clubs, sometimes would have a drink or two, and he'd be fine. He said it was just that one more drink, and he would turn into somebody you didn't want to be around. And Ed McMahon back in the New York days would help him get home, and it was just really, really bad. And in a comedy club, Dangerfield helped get Johnny home, and Johnny never thanked Dangerfield. And Apparently, a lot of times when Carson would drink, he wouldn't remember things. So I think it was Dangerfield's friend told him, Rodney, Carson probably doesn't even realize that you helped him. And Dangerfield's like, he never said thank you. Screw that guy. And Dangerfield didn't do the show for something like, it was like 8 or 9 years. He refused to do the show, and he was such a staple. He's like, I don't need Carson anymore. I do movies.
Right.
I don't need him. So.
Right.
It wasn't until a couple months before the show that Dangerfield had a movie coming out from Paramount, and I think somebody else said, "Do you want to do Carson's show?" And he got a little nostalgic, and he finally relented and went on Johnny's show and was magic. I mean, it was like not even a second had gone by. He was Dangerfield again. 25 jokes. Most comedians did 25 jokes. He did 25 jokes stand up, sit down with Johnny, another 25 rapid fire. Powerhouse.
Right. I was fortunate to interview him on a couple occasions, and he was just such a pro. Just exactly what you're saying: set up joke, set up joke, set up joke, and he was great. A couple random questions. I just thought of something. You know, again, I like people that are smooth and graceful and elegant. And Johnny was like that. And I just remembered he did that golf swing, which I thought was so cool. Any reason why he did the golf swing?
Somebody was just asking me that. I've heard different reasons, but I've not been able to substantiate any of them. I should look into it. I don't think it certainly happened at the top. Like, a lot of that stuff was just organically happened. Like, the Here's Johnny thing, Ed over time just added all these extra seconds to it started Here's Johnny. Doc wasn't a flashy dresser at first. So I think, and Tommy Newsom didn't play dull. He wasn't dull in real life.
He was boring, though.
Yeah. So it just all these Ed's drinking jokes. I mean, Johnny was the one that had the drinking problem. Ed was only drunk once on the show, and Johnny called him out on it. It's a famous episode, and he was plastered, which I can tell you what the circumstances were if you want. But yeah, they invented a lot of these jokes that just became running for years.
Right. I think it's smooth. I think the golf swing is country club. It's casual, it's relaxed. And I thought it was a unique thing. I remember, let's see, I read it, and I'm trying to remember why Ed was drinking early in the day. Did he close a deal on something or what? Why
Ed McMahon is at the Polo Lounge, Beverly Hills. He's with Pat McCormick, Johnny's writer, who was wild, and singer Paul Williams, who back then was drinking and doing. Paul Williams, I talked to on the podcast, and he was great with some of his stories. But Ed McMahon found out 2 court cases went his way and were settled. He never drank on show days, and he had a bunch of potent drinks. Right. And he would go into Johnny's office right before the show just to say hi. They would just really come in or two, and it was so clear. Johnny just started laughing. It was clear McMahon was trying to hide that he wasn't drunk, and it was so clear. McMahon starts the show from Hollywood and starts slurring some of the words, and then he comes out, and Carson is just so amused and is really not calling Ed out too much. But then he's introducing Joan Embry, and McMahon keeps interrupting Johnny, and Johnny just kind of looks at him and is getting all these Jack Benny silence laughs, just reaction shots. And then finally to Ed, he's like, you're not fooling anybody, and kind of calls him out. But it was the one time Ed was, drunk on the show, and people still talk about it.
You just reminded me, Johnny, his facial expressions, and he'd get laughs with just a look. And I remember a quote from Dave Letterman because Dave worshiped Johnny as well. Right. He says, Johnny can raise an eyebrow and get a laugh that it will take me 10 or 20 words to get that laugh. I mean, because Johnny would do these looks, and you're right. It was Jack Benny. It was that. And
silences.
It just melted.
Ed Ames with the tomahawk is still considered the longest sustained laugh by a studio audience in the history of TV to this day. Right. And it was Ed Ames trying to go over and get the tomahawk. And Ed Ames told me in his 90s at Beverly Hills, Mark, I didn't know how to throw a tomahawk. It hits the crotch area of this outline of a cowboy in wood. And Johnny, in his brilliance, because Ed Ames is going to go retrieve it right away, Johnny takes him by the arm and restrains Ed Ames. Minute of laughter, just gets more and more laughter. And then Johnny does an ad-lib, and it's like TV history is made. Yeah. And that was total Jack Benny influence that kicked in.
Right. Here's something fun, because Jack Benny. There was a quote in the 1990s. I read Albert Brooks. He said, "We're all insignificant. No one under 30 knows who Jack Benny is." And that was in the 1990s. So Johnny loved Jack Benny.
Oh
Correct?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's his favorite. Yeah. He cried for 3 hours, sobbing. After Benny's funeral. I mean, Johnny was a mess. Yeah, that really hit him. Him and Buddy Rich,
Yeah.
sobbing like a baby.
Yeah. Tell me about his relationship with Don Rickles.
Rickles and him met back in the day in Vegas. Johnny started Vegas in '64 at the Sahara Hotel, and Rickles, I think, was in the Sabar Lounge, and Rickles was in awe of Johnny. At this point, Rickles could not get booked on late night TV. It was considered way too dangerous and radical to have somebody come out and insult the host. Johnny was the first one in 1965 to put Rickles on TV, and Johnny was smart. He waited till it was a Los Angeles visit. They went out to LA in '65. It was double the studio audience. They're really, really good. But Johnny had to take, and this was very brave. Johnny was considered brave to do this. Johnny took 3 minutes to explain to the audience, okay, this next comedian who you don't know, he's going to come out and make fun of us, but it's okay. He had to do all this exposition on the insult humor. And Rickles finally comes out, and it was decided that Rickles' event could start by making fun of Ed and the band leader Skitch Henderson, and then the audience would see Johnny laughing. So then it would be okay eventually for Rickles to actually make fun of Johnny, and Johnny would laugh. But I have to say, it took the audience a couple appearances to really get Rickles. I mean, that's really to look back and to see somebody doing insult comedy, that was such a big controversial revolutionary thing. But at the time it was. And then they would always do a pre-interview, but they would never get to it. I mean, Rickles, Buddy Hackett, Steve Lawrence, there were certain people that they would have it, but they would just get thrown out. And Rickles and Carson, I mean, they spent time together. They were pals. And his daughter Mindy Rickles told me that he worshipped Johnny. I mean, I think that was absolutely clear.
Let me see what we have here. I'm looking at I have 3 pages of notes here.
Yeah, this is fun. Take your time.
Dave Letterman said in an interview that when he had the heart surgery and he had guest hosts, he said, "Oh, they're going to replace me." And he said that Johnny Carson had a different type of security when it came to guest hosts. Why wasn't Johnny concerned about all these guest hosts maybe performing well? Did NBC ever say, hey, some of these guys are good and they're less expensive? Or why was Johnny so solid there at NBC, there at NBC?
I think Johnny at one point was 25% of NBC's ratings, and he was, as Steve Martin said, maybe the most recognizable human being in the United States, and just yielded this power. And I think NBC was just nervous to start over. The only person that I think NBC and Letterman, that Carson thought could really replace him was Dave Letterman, who 4 shows in is an unknown, is guest hosting The Tonight Show. And Johnny was nervous about Letterman competing against him, so much so that they put him under contract with NBC, so he couldn't really compete against Johnny. He does a morning show which fails, that is critically acclaimed, that wins Emmys, and then for a whole year they pay Dave $1 million and he's doing nothing. He hosts The Tonight Show a few times, and Letterman's getting restless, and his manager Buddy Moore is talking to Westinghouse about doing this syndicated late night show opposite Carson. Carson is nervous. What is the best case scenario for Carson? I'm going to put Dave after my show. I'm going to own the show, and I'm going to give Dave limitations. No Fridays when all the young people are staying up. I think Dave got like 3 or 4 Fridays a year to do 90-minute specials. I'm going to make sure Dave doesn't do a monologue, which Johnny believed was essential to make a late-night show succeed. 4 band members, all these what he thought were limitations. And Merrill Markoe, Dave, who created the show with Dave, told me they thought those were hilariously, just ridiculous, minimal requests that really had no bearing on the show. But in terms of Johnny playing it smart and not competing against Dave, it was brilliant. I mean, Letterman got 11 and a half years on that NBC show before the CBS, and Johnny was able to stay number 1, and he really thought, even though Westinghouse wasn't in every single home, he was the one person that could take him on.
I learned something from the book.
Yes.
The restrictions on Dave.
That's right.
I didn't. You listed them all, and I didn't know about that.
They came from Johnny. Merrill Markoe said, and she basically said, no, they didn't. Dave Tebbett was the vice president. Johnny Carson put restrictions on Tom Snyder. He had to prove the guest. Johnny That was the most competitive, insecure person. In 1971, Craig, 4 TVs are going on at the UN Plaza building in his apartment at 11:30. He's watching his own show, he's watching Dick Cavett, David Frost show, and he's watching either Merv Griffin or Joey Bishop. I mean, he's studying them all like a football coach, and there was a reason for that. But for whatever reason, he was okay with people guest hosting the show where, you're right, Letterman until the heart surgery. The person that did the best was the most critically acclaimed was Vince Vaughn. And he was the one that people liked the most. You'd think it was like a regular stand-up comic, but yeah, Dave, that's interesting. I didn't know that Dave said that he was insecure about that. That makes more sense that he never would have guest host.
And I remember telling people during the guest hosting for Dave, I said, watch Fallon. And then he didn't do very well the first time. He was a little too nervous. When he guest hosted for Dave, he actually guest hosted for Dave.
I don't remember that. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, that he did that.
Yeah. And so I was obsessed with Dave. And when he hosted the Oscars, I got emotional. That's our guy. Yeah. And people don't remember how popular he was at 12:30 after the Tonight Show.
The best.
Where he got those specials. He got those every once in a while in the primetime specials, right? He would do these specials, which is huge. And that was great.
Radio City Music Hall, Universal Amphitheater. Yep. It was amazing. No, Dave has influenced more comedy in the last 30 years than I think any other figure. I mean, he was an innovator. The NBC show is a masterpiece, in my opinion. That was 11 and a half years.
There was some joke where the showgirl came out at Radio City and then Larry Bud Melman, and Dave says they have the same DNA. Remember, this is all the same DNA.
Yeah, I remember that. That was the 10th anniversary. That was really funny at Radio City, yeah.
Let's see. Let's go to, I did learn this. We don't have to get into it, but I didn't know Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant never did the show. I'm a big Cary Grant fan.
That's right. No TV rule. He had a no TV rule.
And Johnny had a falling out with another guy that I adore, Orson Welles.
They were friends, but Johnny was very black and white with his views, and Wells was a magician. Johnny was a magician. Magic Castle. They had a lot in common. And Johnny, when he was 17, hitchhiked after graduation from Nebraska to L.A. and saw Wells do magic and was in awe of Wells. And then Wells was guest hosting the Tonight Show, and he told Johnny, "I'm going to do a Kreskin." And Johnny was just in disbelief. What does that even mean? So Johnny, on his day off, incognito, shows up in the back of the studio in a disguise and watches Kreskin do this mentalist routine with volunteers in the audience, and he finds out the volunteers are stooges, there's plants. That violated the code, the magician code to Johnny. He was banned from either hosting the guest hosting the show or going on with Johnny. I think he might have been able to go on with it was a guest host like John Davidson or something.
Orson Welles,
Johnny was like the relationship's over. I mean, that's how strict Johnny was with his views. It was definitely, he was a sensitive guy, and he went a little overboard sometimes,
right? With
Carl Sagan, probably, who corrected him twice on air, and he was just embarrassed and never had him on again.
It's okay to have a healthy ego, but no, I mean, it happens when it's hard to be human sometimes when people are fawning all over you. Let's see, Joan Rivers. So they were really tight.
They didn't really socialize much. Maybe a little bit back in New York.
Joan slept with her.
Joan said that happened on Howard Stern, and her friend said that her friend said it never happened. She would say these outrageous things to get press coverage.
Right.
So she also said she was with Robert Mitchum. It's impossible. Her Melissa Rivers wrote a book a couple years ago, said "Lies My Mother Told." It's something like that. It's impossible to know sometimes with her. But in 1965, Rivers goes on the show, and almost instantly she's heralded as the next Carol Burnett, Walter Winchell, all these columnists gushing over her, and Johnny had her back like in 10 days, and she became a huge star.
Right. And so I think it's safe to say, we don't have to get into it because I think a lot of people have covered it. But Joan went, syndicated show or no, Fox show. And didn't tell Johnny, didn't give him a heads up.
Listen,
everyone said she made a mistake.
Listen, Barry Diller sat down with me in New York, who was president of Fox, and he told Joan, you owe this to Johnny to tell him you're going to be competing against him on Fox. He's done so much for you. Rivers' own friend said, Johnny's going to be furious. You need to tell him. Joan was trying to be a good wife. Her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, was the one that said there's going to be unforeseen circumstances. You can't tell Johnny. And she was trying to be a good wife, and it really, really hurt her in the end. Edgar was somebody that apparently a lot of people didn't respect in the industry, and he wanted to be an executive producer of his own show, and they got The Late Show. But that was error number one. Error number two, at least in Johnny's eyes, is that she had signed the deal, I guess, 2.5 months prior to Johnny finding out. And when he did find out, Joan had still been in negotiations with Carson Productions, because Johnny owned the show, to keep guest hosting the show, even though she had secretly signed a deal and had no intentions to keep guest hosting the show, but was still in negotiations. Johnny thought that those were bad, and then she tried to take Johnny's producer, which she admits, and all 5 talent coordinators were offered double their salary, and loyalty-wise, they stayed with Johnny, and Johnny just could not believe that somebody would do this to me. He found out from Brandon Tartikoff, the NBC president, and he just thought all these things with Rivers, the relationship's over. And Rivers tried after the show, she was removed as host, to get back in Johnny's good graces, and it never happened.
So when I'm reading this and I hear the major mistake is that Joan Rivers does not tell Johnny and give him a heads up, hey, I got this deal.
Yeah.
Because you say, and whether it's true or not, or others have said, if Johnny would have been given a heads up, he would have given her his blessing.
He would have warned her.
Yeah. But as I'm reading this, not only did she not tell Johnny, she's trying to poach his staff.
That did happen, and she admitted that.
I mean, that's like off the charts ridiculous. That's like cutthroat, right?
Yes. Now, Johnny would have been honest. He was a straight shooter. Johnny is the one, and people don't remember this, he's the one that warned Roseanne Barr, you do not want to sing the Star Spangled Banner at the Padres game. She was about to, and he's like, it's the most difficult song. You don't want to do this. She didn't listen to Johnny, and then the nation is outraged. President Herbert Walker Bush called her a disgrace, and Johnny would have told Miss Rivers, you have my blessing to go to Fox. I know it's a lot of money, but I think it's a mistake. Your style would only work, Johnny believed, 1 week every 5 weeks. You cannot do this every night, making fun of Elizabeth Taylor as fat jokes and all these complaints that would come into NBC because of Rivers. Johnny was protecting her, and just to get the guest, and Miss Rivers went off on her own, and the ratings just went down and down and down. And after 10 months, Barry Diller said to Joan, I'm removing your husband as producer. And she said, then if so, I quit. And Rivers thought Barry Diller was bluffing about getting rid of her husband. And Diller wasn't bluffing. Joan was out of a job. 2 months later, Edgar Rosenberg, unfortunately, commits suicide. Joan finds out soon after she's in debt millions of dollars. Yeah. And I give Rivers so much credit for resiliency to bounce back. I mean, not only financially, but just as, her career and just everything that she went through. I mean, I've met her a few times. I don't know if you met her. Very nice lady. I just, the way that everything went down with Carson, I don't know if she was the most forthcoming with how things actually happened.
Right. A lot of really nice anecdotes in there. I'll give you a quick one. Dick Cavett. Hey, Johnny calls him. Let's have lunch or let's have dinner. He goes, well, I'm wearing sneakers. I can't. I'm really casual. Oh, just meet me there. Tell people what happened. Yeah,
and then Carson, told Cavett, because Cavett was doing shows in L.A., just meet me at this restaurant, and it's kind of nice. And Cavett's like, I'm wearing filthy white tennis shoes. So he shows up, and Carson, to make Cavett feel more comfortable, is wearing white tennis shoes just to help Dick. Dick told me when he was 12 years old that he remembers this, Johnny remembers this as well, that when Cavett was 12 years old, he remembers going to a church basement to see Johnny, the local DJ, radio star, do magic. And Cavett and his two 12-year-old friends went backstage to say hi to Johnny beforehand. We're junior magicians, Mr. Carson. And then Johnny, during the show, just like Ed Sullivan would do this, said, there's 30 people in the audience, stand up, and introduced Cavett and his 12-year-old friends. And Cavett said that night in his journal, he wrote, this was the greatest day of my life. I met Johnny Carson.
I actually read a couple books from Dick Cavett.
Yeah, they're great.
And his talk show, I don't know how it did in the ratings, but man, it's still fun to watch some of his interviews.
Absolutely, I agree.
I think his interview with Peter O'Toole is a little better than Johnny's.
O'Toole was just a little bit.
No, I'm there's a movie called Beckett that everyone talks about, Lawrence of Arabia, but Beckett, he and Richard Burton were both nominated. 1964. They lost to Rex Harrison, My Fair Lady. But I love Peter O'Toole, and I guess he didn't do very well on Johnny's show.
O'Toole, and he talked about this later in a second time, I think it was the mid-'60s, was doing one of those press tours where I think he was in Japan, and he was on an airplane, and they, back then especially, would just serve you drinks constantly, and O'Toole was just downing booze for hours and hours, like 19 hours without eating any food, and by the time he went on Johnny's show, was completely coherent. And what Johnny did is he threw a commercial and said, he has exhaustion, and made all the excuses, where Jack Parr, when Mickey Rooney was drunk, was like, I think you're drunk, and called Rooney out and tried to humiliate him. And
Right.
Carson wouldn't do that. And then afterwards, O'Toole was in the hallway outside Studio 6B and just kind of realized how embarrassed he was and collapsed and just was crying, just how ashamed he was. And then he went on a bunch of years later in Burbank, was still a little incoherent, but better, and was talking about the fact that, it was a combination of lots of drinking and not eating. So that would eventually, that would occasionally happen. You would get somebody like that. Back then, Craig, it's amazing to think people drinking and smoking on a late night show, and that was fine. That was standard.
The other thing is, it's not always easy being a guest in general, especially for like hosts, because they're not in control when they're a guest. So like when Dave's a guest on a show, he's not not as good as he would be when he's hosting, or even Johnny wouldn't be as good as a guest.
Sure.
I'm not sure. The Peter O'Toole thing is wild, but another anecdote here. In the late 80s, I was living in LA. I used to go to the Comedy Store on Monday nights and see the comics. There was a 2-drink minimum. You get in, and they'd do 5 or 7 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. I saw all these guys. Jackson Purdue. I saw a guy named Argus Hamilton. He'd come out with a newspaper, and you have a little anecdote about Argus Hamilton in the book.
Argus Hamilton was going on Johnny's show a lot, and Johnny loved him. And Argus has talked about it with me, that he had a drug problem. It was really bad. And Argus's dad did something brilliant that was so out of the box, which is to write Johnny Carson, the most famous man in America, and said, can you please help my son? He has a drug problem. And Johnny said to Argus, you're not doing my show anymore until you get clean. He had tried to go to rehab a couple times and was unsuccessful. And that and Mitzi Shore at the Comedy Store did the same thing. And it was the combination of both that Argus said that he got clean because of Carson and Mitzi. And Johnny did those things all the time. He didn't want credit for it. I would hear those stories, and they're in the book. Some of them I didn't have room to fit in, but it was very consistent.
Yeah.
One of Carson's writers told me he was going through a painful divorce, and Johnny said, I know you're going through a tough time. Can I take you out to dinner and kind of talk you through this? I've been through this. And stuff like that people would not think about Johnny doing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Ray Combs' suicide. He writes. He gives. Johnny sent the family money, is what it.
$50K.
Yeah.
Check for $50K. I heard you might need this, and it paid for the funeral. Yeah.
Let's see. I've got my notes here. At the last page of notes, guess what they are? We've covered them. Henry Bushkin, corrupt. I need to add the word allegedly. Freddie de Cordova, and then. At the end, you cover the transition to Jay Leno. So
yes,
what was the relationship with Jay Leno? Did I read something where he wasn't on for a while? Jay Leno wasn't on the show for a while doing stand-up or whatever?
Yes. Jay Leno debuted and had an amazing debut, so much so that Carson wanted him back the next month. And the problem with Leno is that Carson liked him so much, but Jay was running out of material. So it was like the 5th or 6th time on with Johnny. The material wasn't strong. He had 1 or 2 times where he just did not do well. And Johnny told his comedy booker, Jim McCauley, I never want him on again. I don't find him funny. So the best thing ever happened in Jay Leno's life, career-wise at least, which is that he goes on Dave Letterman's 12:30 show and gets red hot. Yeah. I mean, those 40 appearances on Dave's show are still, they're amazing. And he was so good that Johnny in 1986 relented and said, I want Jay back. And Jay wisely said, I'll come back to the Tonight Show, but I want to guest host. And they gave him 2 guest hosting jobs, and he did very well. And they wanted to give the permanent guest host to Shanley, and Gary turned it down. He said, I don't want to be on TV 5 nights a week. It changes you as a person, and not for the best. That's what Shanley believed. Right. And so then Leno gets the gig, and he famously took it for, I think, $512 a show. Bernie Brillstein apparently was trying to be like, I can get you $20,000, kid, and trying to get his other clients all this money. And Jay's like, well, this is Johnny owns the show. I'm going to do it for scale. You're going to get so much more money in Vegas and on the road, and maybe host the Tonight Show if you do it for $512. And then Jay had his manager, Helen Kushnick, the two of them. They went to every single NBC affiliate across the country, shaking hands, doing photos, got in good with NBC. Meanwhile, Dave wants the Tonight Show, but he's calling the vice presidents of NBC pinheads and making fun of GE, the parent company. Craig, who do you think they're going to give the Tonight Show to? Right. I mean, clearly Carson wanted Dave Letterman to get the gig, but I mean, Jay did everything right with the politicking. He'd successfully guest hosted the show 200 times. It was, in my opinion, it was just a matter of Jay's going to be a lot easier to deal with. They just didn't realize that Helen was going to be difficult, and they eventually had to fire her. And it was, put a photo in the booth of the security guard at Burbank. Don't let this woman in. But she, in February of '91, planted a story, and she admitted this later. She planted a story in the New York Post that NBC wanted Carson gone. And Johnny just couldn't, he knew it was Kushnick, and he just didn't understand, Jay wouldn't have had the permanent guest host if it wasn't for him. Why is she acting like this? And it was just one thing after another with her, and Johnny just didn't get it.
Yeah. I read about Helen Kushnick years ago. Very pushy, very aggressive, obnoxious. And I was upset, like a lot of us. Dave didn't get the job. He was a hero to us, and it was
absolutely
very upsetting. You know what Les Moonves told me at CBS when I was there? He said if NBC had gone with Dave Letterman, we would still be showing the CBS late movie because he didn't think Leno could carve out a late night hour and a half hour there. He didn't think you could carve it out with Jay Leno, only with the charisma and magic of Dave Letterman.
That's amazing. Yeah, they were different. Dave was a broadcaster. We know this. Jack Parr was a broadcaster. Leno was a comic, and for whatever reason, I could give Jay so much credit. I mean, he was number one in the ratings. That he did. But when people are looking back, especially comedians, on who had the show and who was a hero to so many people, especially comedians, and the work that really mattered, it was Dave. Yeah. It took Dave. Dave became someone else. He started at NBC as one thing in early CBS, and then he stopped going to rehearsal, stopped putting as much time into the show, wouldn't leave the studio to do remotes. It became something else, but it was still, as a broadcaster goes in a late night show, he was still, in my opinion, up there with Johnny as number 2. I mean, by far, no comparison.
And when Jay was on Dave's show, he had much more of an edge. Because I knew a producer at the Tonight Show with Leno, and he said Leno had to be a little more safe and, be more wholesome, I guess. And I just remember a joke he did with Dave, because you remember certain jokes. Yeah. And he said, Dave, you hear about this new movie, Teen Angel, honor student by day, hooker by night. Who cares? She's getting the grades. Who cares? She's getting.
That seems very. That's right.
It was one of those kind of jokes.
I was just gonna say, when Jay was guest hosting the Tonight Show in the beginning, he was edgy, and then he would make fun of the guests and upset guests sometimes. Elizabeth Ashley was on my podcast, and she said, Jay made fun of me when he was guest hosting. I was upset, and I watched it, and I was like, oh my goodness. And it was when he got the Tonight Show and knew he was up for it that he started to change it and really was a lot softer. And I guess he believed to inherit the Carson audience, he just could not have the edge, and it was really strange. Like, it's almost like a musician that had this really distinct sound, and suddenly they're doing pop music. But it did work in terms of him being number one, and Jay thought that was enough, really, just to be number one, and you have the best show. I always equated also to the Honeymooners, which was number 2 in the time slot. Perry Como was one. What show are we talking about decades later? I mean, just because you're number one doesn't necessarily mean that you're the best or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a honeymooner. I was a Jackie Gleason fan.
Oh, Gleason was the best. Yeah, I mean, he had a really rough life. Carson wanted him on so bad, and finally got him on when Gleason was promoting his book. And then Gleason, when he passed away, Johnny was outraged that they never gave him an Emmy, and the Academy was giving him one of those honorary things after he died. So Johnny, in one of his rare times, was writing monologue jokes, making fun of the Academy for just being, for like not acknowledging Gleason while he was alive. He was outraged. So if Johnny was outraged on something, he would speak up. Like Burt Parks being removed as
I read that.
Oh, Carson letter writing campaign and nightly for like 4 nights. It was national news because of Carson. I mean, he really was sticking up for Burt Parks.
It's you have it in the book. A lot of comedians say that being on Johnny Carson, doing their stand-up, then being invited over to the couch, made their career, changed their career.
Yeah.
And people don't know that back in the 70s when I grew up, 3 networks. So everybody in the United States was watching Johnny. Everybody. Right. Like you say, the most recognizable face in the United States. Yeah. And there was this comedy special was a one-off. It was in Vegas with, I don't know if you remember this, a couple of years back with Anderson Cooper, and they were honoring Jerry Seinfeld. So they had Chris Rock, Robert Klein, and Gary Shandling on the panel with Jerry, because it was honoring Jerry and he wanted his 3 buddies there. Mm-hmm. And Anderson Cooper said, "What was it like? Do you remember your first time on Carson?" And Jerry Seinfeld said, "When I die, it's the last thing I'll remember." And then Gary Shandling said, "When Johnny died, the last thing he remembered was my first appearance on the Tonight Show." Because Gary's as funny as they get. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, he was very quick. I loved Shandling. I was a huge fan. Obviously, Larry Sanders, and just brilliant. That's so funny. Yeah, Jerry Seinfeld still says to this day it was the biggest moment of his life was going on the Tonight Show. But it took Shandling 5 attempts to get called over to the couch. I mean, Carson only really called over 15, 16 people I know in 30 years over to the couch. But yeah, Seinfeld was so prolific. I don't know how that guy was going on 3-4 times a year with all new material. I mean, he didn't have writers, to my knowledge. He did it all himself. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. So Johnny retires. I was going to go into the last show, the famous quote, "A disc jockey that God love you." I have the note right here. I couldn't believe that. That was and then he died at age 79 from emphysema. So he retired at 66. So he had 13 years where he chilled out in Malibu, but also traveled the world, right?
That's right. I mean, he was still playing the poker game. He was going to Wimbledon, tennis tournaments in Los Angeles. He was on his boat with Bob Wright, president of NBC, and they would go the boat would go all over his boat, the Serengeti. He went to Africa with Jim Fowler, and Johnny took his wife and his kids, and Africa was wonderful. But it wasn't enough to go to Africa when he went to Russia with Bob Wright. He would take 4 months of Russian classes with somebody from, Barakster. Somebody would come to his house in Malibu and teach him enough Russian where he could communicate. And the people over there were so amused that an American would take the time to do this. And same with in Africa, Swahili. He could speak enough to communicate.
Right.
And Carson was just so curious and just so adventurous. So it was a lot of alone time. He liked his alone time on his boat. He was an introvert. A lot of people, like I am an introvert, but at the same time, he loved his poker game. He loved being with his writers. He'd take out his writers to lunch. So this whole J.D. Salinger, Garbo, recluse thing that the media made him out to be was not true.
Right.
I thought that was important to talk about because I really did believe that this guy was not really leaving his house too much, and that was not true.
Yeah. He had a Corvette and he drove it from Malibu to Burbank. I don't know what that commute is. Is it a long commute? I think it would be.
He was doing it for the most part, at least when it wasn't rush hour for the most part. So yeah, I mean, he liked just the unwinding. He'd be working on the show in his head, and it's probably maybe an hour, a little bit less than an hour. But Ed McMahon had a limousine, and Johnny thought it was ridiculous. The license plate said, "Here's Ed." And, Johnny would, for at least in the 70s, like a brown paper bag lunch, no bodyguard. He did carry a gun for protection. He never had to use it, thankfully. But Johnny just really looked down upon that behavior with limousines, and like people like Bob Hope that he believed didn't have any friends, and his whole life was show business, no interest outside show business. Carson kind of he really looked down at that.
Right. Another thing I just remembered, as I say, he was sophisticated and urbane and smooth and all this stuff.
That's right.
He had the Johnny Carson line. He had a clothing line.
Yes. That was Joanne Carson's doing as well, wife number 2. They were living at the UN Plaza, and Sonny Werblin, who owned the New York Jets, was their neighbor.
Yeah.
And Werblin, she's the one that said you should team up with Werblin. Back in the day, Johnny was paying taxes, the tax bracket. He wasn't a corporation. He was paying as a single person. It was like 90% bracket. It was like ridiculous on how much money it was. I don't want to say ridiculous, but it was so much money. And Werblin's the one that got him in a corporation. He was paying less taxes. The clothing line, they did a bunch of other business things, and Carson got very wealthy. Johnny was playing arenas and all over the country. He was playing before, but Werblin got him more money. Right. And that was big with the men's line. I mean, I would talk to people. People would email me across the country that they would save up when they were, teenagers and in their 20s, just to they wanted to look like Johnny. I mean, he was definitely influencing the fashion.
Right. By the way, Mark, it's okay to say paying high taxes is ridiculous.
Well, just okay. I just want to make sure that I have that right, that it was the 90% tax bracket. It was something like that.
Right.
Yeah, so Carson, but he believed in doing the right thing. It was always black or white. Of course I'm going to do this because this is my duty to do it. And then Werblin is the one that really got him. And, Werblin, he loved going to the Polo Grounds, loved going to Yankee Stadium, where I think the Jets were playing for some of the years, and he would go, and he'd be in the locker room with Namath when they won the championship, and Namath would be pouring champagne over Carson's head, and they had parties together. Namath loved Carson, except, of course, when he drank, and Carson had one time where he actually was drinking with the Jets and slapped Ralph Baker in the face, and Baker was smart enough to realize Johnny does not mean to do this, and I'm not going to retaliate. But yeah,
that's
fun times.
Great. I'm telling you, this was fun for me.
This was great, Craig. I really liked doing this. This was amazing.
Yeah, I've kind of moved. I watch a lot of espionage now. I tell people to watch 3 Days of the Condor from the 70s with Robert Redford. And but late night was such a big part of my life. So it was fun to reflect and look back. As a kid, it was a big part of my life. I don't follow it much anymore, but Johnny was the king.
He was. And Dave Letterman, the NBC show, early CBS. And still, as a broadcaster goes, you can't do much better than those two.
Thank you for writing the book.
Oh, I appreciate it. I'm so thrilled you liked it. It meant a lot to me.
Yeah, it was lot of information in there. And good luck with the book.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
That's our show. We will see you next time. And remember, young people, I'm proud of you.